Hi there. I didn't want this news to get lost in the shuffle of how busy everything was last week, so I held off on it until now. But another new writer has been revealed for the Game of Thrones prequel TV series, House of the Dragon. Charmaine DeGraté, making her the fourth female writer attached to this prequel, and officially the first black writer attached to this franchise ever on the prequel or the original series. But what really impressed me most were her strong writing credentials and background and understanding of how production works. That the one or two other points where this was briefly reported on, people just read off her quick IMDb bio and didn't look it up. I actually sat down and listened through 2 long podcast interviews she did a few years ago, and it really impressed me how much she was really gaining experience working on everything. She's best known for being a staff writer on CW's The 100 Show for about 5 years, which David J. Peterson, the linguist from Game of Thrones, was also the linguist on that show, making their future languages, so that ties together there. That's how I knew of it. I said she was on for 5 years. She didn't stick around for the last season, which probably for the best. I heard a lot of people didn't really like it. But that's where she got most of her work experience from. If I want to go through her whole background on this, I researched it. She graduated from Vassar College with a double major in English literature and political science. Vassar, great Seven Sisters College. While there, she spent summers working as a congressional aide in Washington, D.C., and produced stage plays at Vassar's Powerhouse Theater. So she had some experience early on working in scripted dialogue. She is also a graduate of the prestigious Warner Brothers Writers Workshop. And I didn't understand this from the brief news blurbs I heard about it, saying, oh, she was in this, that listening to her explain it in the podcast interviews, that no, they only accept 8 applicants every year. This is very competitive to get into. It's impressive she got into that. Also, she's the youngest recipient of the August Wilson Playwright Fellowship, and she is an active member of the Women in Film organization, which is devoted to advancing the careers of women in the screen industries. But I was really impressed by these things she said in these interviews, which I've linked below, and for copyright reasons, I don't want to use clips from them, but I've made some block quotes that I want to read off, because this really sold me on that she'll be good for this show. The first one, which is just her approach to screenwriting in general, quote, I feel like theme and character is always more important than plot mechanics and technobabble. Well, not more important, but it services the plot. The plot comes out of the theme, the characters, and the story moves come out of the theme and character arcs. Not thinking of really cool story points and then retrofitting character motivation to accommodate them. So openly saying, no, do not think of cool things, then kind of retcon characters into them without explanation. They flow out of story arcs and themes. She believes in themes, which is great. Well, after she got out of Vassar, where she was writing stage plays and stuff, the first spec script she shopped around to get hired was actually for The Americans, which they liked, and she got hired around between a couple of networks like Netflix and Hulu. Actually, she explained this, that her script for The Americans was never actually produced, but that's normal, that's what a spec script is, that as an outsider, you have no way of knowing what their upcoming story arcs are, so you can't make an episode that'll actually fit, but you make, a test episode, a test script of this is like a bottle episode of what I would write as an episode of The Americans, and they like it and hire you based on the strength of the script, even though they're not really going to use it. But that's common practice. That's how the spec script system works. So she shopped that around, bounced between a few networks as just an early person, and then got into the Warner Brothers Writers Workshop. But then right out of that workshop in 2015, she got hired to work on The 100 for CW. And there's this really long block quote I'm going to give that I urge you, I told you it's not worth making clips from. Go to the podcast below. It starts 13 minutes in and it's 2 minutes long. So 13 minutes to 15 minutes. Let me read this off of how it wasn't just being a screenwriter, but the work experience on that led her to understand how important it is to also be a producer, and that the production side of things has to work hand in hand with writing. And this is all one big system that creates the show. So, quote, after the production draft, you'll get a series of meetings with the production department heads. Sometimes we can feel isolated as writers, especially because, we're down in Los Angeles. But when you start these pre-production meetings with the team in Vancouver, the 100 filmed in Vancouver, it's so great to have all of these geniuses, the production department heads. Our people are so great. Just having them all together, and when there's a problem, it's collectively fixed and collectively brainstormed. And you really get the sense there's a machine working to create this. It's not just one person. As a writer, we're kind of siloed down in Los Angeles, and we'll type something, and then our line producer, she said, the specific guy, and you don't need to know his name, that their line producer would come up to the writers and say, wow, that thing you wrote, that's really great. And I look forward to the feature film production. Michael Bay will kill it when he directs it next summer. That The 100 wasn't some movie budget. It wasn't even like an HBO, Netflix scale budget. It was a cable drama. That they did not have the budget to do all the things that she could imagine. And she goes on, yeah, you got to calm down there. And we had this phrase on the show, bonsai, like the shrubbery that you garden. The phrase they used was, she said, it's bonsai it down on that script, bonsai it down. She explained, well, it's like in the script phase, you'd start out writing, there's this vast, beautiful forest. But then the line producer would come around and go, we can't realistically film that or build that. Turn it into a little bonsai garden for the actual production. So just the phrase that came up was, turn that forest into a bonsai garden. Bonsai it down. So calm down there with budget and resources. You remember, when you're writing day, interior, exterior, that's something else I think is really valuable and will make a staff writer shine. I didn't really realize this until I caught myself at 2 a.m. in the mountains of Vancouver in a torrential rain downpour in November. And, we're just freezing. We're in freezing rain in the middle of a November night up in the mountains. And the reality hit me that something I had written in June on a sunny day in my office in Los Angeles, that this is the reality of that. She wrote this really cool nighttime explosion scene. And it's not just someone running through a forest at night. When you have an explosion, you need to set it up again. You can't just go, everyone back to their places, start over. It is a long and developed process. So we were through our 15th setup of this explosion scene at night, and it's 2 a.m. in the freezing cold rain in November, and you as the writer can't go back in your trailer because you don't want to seem to be the jerk. You have to be on set with your stunt guys. So it gives you perspective. It makes you wear your producer hat. So never again will I be writing an explosion nighttime scene. Because it's like, oh, that's right, it's more time, it's more money, this crew is understandably exhausted. So just being much more mindful of that, wearing your producer's hat when you start writing, is something I wish I'd probably done a little bit more of when I started out. So much to unpack in that, just hearing her say that. This is a real writer-producer. And then later in the podcast interview, 36 minutes into it, she says, quote, it's a team. I think that's another thing I would tell new writers. What I would advise new writers is get your team together, because you can't do this yourself. You can't do this on your own. And when you're 5 drafts into a script and you have no perspective, you're going to want to go to that person that you can speak shorthand with, and they can figure out what's frustrating you with a project when you don't have the language to do it. Another quote here, I can't work through the night. I need to be disciplined and work 8 hours a day over a whole week, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, maximum, to get the first draft. For me, the key is consistency. I'm going to repeat that. For me, the key is consistency. And she also said, don't take breaks. You always write like an hour or two a day on just something so you never get rusty. So this is everything you as a teacher should be telling new writers, that she has this wisdom. On top of this, she mentioned that her feature scripts have received recognition from the Academy's Nicholl Fellowships, from the Blacklist, which is this famous list of voted on what everyone considers the best unproduced scripts of the year, that through no fault of the screenwriter, they didn't get picked up by anyone, but this is a really good script in the opinion of other screenwriters. So that's great that she was on the Blacklist, as other writers think she's good. And another recognition point for Charmaine is that she was a semi-finalist at the Austin Film Festival about 7 years ago. Quote, Austin Film Fest is about supporting new writers. And if a big name like Vince Gilligan comes, it's not for them, it's because they're being very generous to come there and give advice to new writers and help lift them up. I don't want to spend too much time talking about this right now, but I have a playlist titled Austin Film Fest on my channel. If you've been following this, consider everything Benioff and Weiss did last October, a full year ago, at that infamous panel they had at Austin Film Fest. That really went viral. I'm talking to the person who made the tweet thread report that went viral on it. And real news sites are actually picking it up, that they received an honorary award for season 8, which is just the heads of the festival wanting to increase their profile. They didn't actually earn a place there. It was an honorary thing. And they gave a panel just praising themselves and boasting for a solid hour to an audience of screenwriters, professional screenwriters. We cheated our way through the system, and we're actually terrible at this. We don't know how screenwriting works. We know less, that is nothing, about the production process. I mean, they were cracking jokes about when they were having that infamous 60-day long, brutal, long night battle filming at night in the middle of winter. That they were boasting and cracking jokes about how they slipped out of it and didn't go to that. And they were just at home, and they'd swing by once a week or so. And, Kit Harington has talked about that. I've posted clips of this, of the cast and crew were really fuming at them that you aren't here suffering with us. And this is just, you're removed from it. And it was deeply unprofessional of them to abandon them like that. And they didn't give any writing advice. I didn't fully understand Austin Film Fest. I hadn't really heard of before, because it isn't Comic-Con. It isn't South by Southwest Fest. This isn't something that big-name writers go to get self-serving video interviews. This is a writer's workshop, and in the circles of professional screenwriters, it's one of the few things that's still considered sacred. I don't think Emmy voting is considered sacred anymore. It's a popularity contest, but no, Austin Film Fest was a name and experience that carried respect. And her saying this, that you go there to lift up other writers. And they gave a whole panel talking about, we're amazing, cheated our way through the system. And then we're bragging HBO was pressuring us hire a full staff of real writers. And we refused. We were best for it. We didn't need a full writing staff. And they promoted up their personal assistants based on loyalty. And just how Benioff approached this. It was Benioff and his 3 cronies, Weiss, Cogman, and Hill. Between the 4 of them, none of them had a screenwriting degree, and they didn't really know what they were doing. And recognized that any major TV show needs a full writer's room of 8 to 12 people. That's a normal size. If you look at any other Emmy-level show or just a cable-level show like The 100, and it's a collaborative effort, and as she said, you don't just dash off a rough draft and hand it in. It has to go through like at least 5 draft revisions, peer-reviewed by the other writers, if only because it is physically impossible to write that much content. It's not a matter of hoarding it. It's unfair that you weren't lifting up other writers. It wasn't even in Benioff's own interest to do that. That he couldn't write the whole season and personally direct things. This was more than one person could ever do, more than him and this 2 or 3 other assistants could. And just in this one Austin Film Fest panel, really concentrated. I have video clips of this, well, audio clips that I set to transcripts, which got taken down everywhere else, really ranting. I didn't need to hire other writers because I know I'm best for it. I didn't know how production worked, made all sorts of ridiculous demands, and then abandoned the production team to film grueling night shoots. Then he'll give that wacky story about, on top of all of that, Benioff will say, I'm the night writer. He'll get a great idea at midnight and stay up until dawn typing it out really fast, then hand it in to the staff the next day. And that isn't how writing works. That's how irresponsible college freshmen write a term paper, a midterm or something. That is, you're a child. This is deeply irresponsible, and you excluded so many other people from the process. And he didn't earn his place at Austin Film Fest for all of his incompetence and old boys networks that got him there. And he's boasting about, I didn't know what I was doing and I'm unqualified and kept everyone out. The only reason he was there is because he was getting an honorary award, not that he earned a place there. Whereas Charmaine is a frequent person at Austin Film Fest. They go, she's regularly involved in it, along with dozens of other writers. She's a frequent panelist because she was a semi-finalist back in 2013 or so. That she earned a spot there based on the quality of a screenplay that she had written. So the utter contrast, she is the opposite in every respect of how Benioff did that. That were I to hypothetically describe the opposite of him, of someone who earned their place at Austin Film Fest, who gave a long interview speech about the importance of production, that saying that she recognizes something I write on a sunny day in June in Los Angeles is something that the crew is spending hours at night in a Vancouver November in the mountains in freezing rain filming, that has physical reality of filming it that you have to take into consideration as a producer. So everything about these interviews she gave really won me over and really made me feel confident in her. I urge you all to listen to the whole podcast she gave. It was great, talking about her experience on The 100. And you go, oh, well, she was just a writer on a cable sci-fi show, The 100, for 5 years. Do you realize that, like, objectively, that is more work experience in the formal process of TV writing than Benioff and Weiss had when they joined Game of Thrones? Benioff had written a few movie scripts, but by his own admission, never worked with other people on a timeline, like a TV timeline where you're under the crunch, or with the production side of things. Movie writing is very different from TV writing. Whereas TV writing, it's the writers are in charge, not the director. And dealing with, you need to be working and collaborating with a dozen other writers, and then you work and collaborate with all the production department heads at deciding what to do and how this can be physically realized with limitations. Everything we hear from the production staff who are willing to speak up about it after Game of Thrones, like Miguel Sapochnik, a director, saying very bluntly in that IndieWire interview after the finale, when we tell Benioff and Weiss something is physically impossible, they just plain ignore us. And this is one of their main directors. It started to get frightening, the things they'd say, find a way. And it got ludicrous that it's not just, oh, well, they're pushing for more. It was becoming a break with reality, that they just build a fully realized set that we're never actually going to use. I just found out today, the spiral staircase they had Clegane Bowl in, the fight between Sandor and his brother, was 70 feet tall. It was the tallest set they'd ever built, and it stretched to the ceiling of the Titanic Studios, the only set to ever do that. And just, why? Why did you make them build this? You're not even going to see the top levels. You could just reuse the same 20-foot stretch of it through artful editing. You didn't need to build the whole thing. Why did you need to do that? It was wasting money and finite man-hours of set construction time. So yeah, Charmaine DeGraté has more screenwriting and more production experience as a result of working on The 100 for 5 years than Benioff and Weiss did when they got in this. On top of this, after 8 years, they were unwilling to learn. So by 8 years into this, they knew just as much as they did in the first season. Whereas she's talking about how much I learned on this as I gradually got promoted up from a writer to a writer-producer, and all of it made me feel a lot better about her being on this show. It was great. Please listen to her whole podcast. Now, I really wanted to make this video a lot more about qualifications than about identity politics. And what really impressed me again was her talking about her work experience on The 100 and, mature advice about how writing works as an actual profession, collaborating with other people and not an ego trip for one trust fund baby. But to talk about the diversity and representation, I left this off to the end because I didn't want to stress it as much, because what's more important is that Charmaine really knows what she's doing. Nonetheless, representation does matter, particularly because Game of Thrones really failed at behind-the-scenes diversity and representation. They'd been writing women really badly, like the invented Sansa rape that they just deflected from and wouldn't even talk about in interviews. Of what the hell are you doing? I don't have to talk to you about why I made this drastic change. Or the Daenerys stuff, or even Catelyn things, or how they were handling non-white characters like Missandei and Grey Worm very badly by season 8. There was a lot of backlash to that after season 8, rightly so. And it's not just that there was backlash, it's that they seemed surprised and unprepared that there would be backlash, that they really were that tone deaf. Just all the things they were confronted with at their Austin Film Fest panel during the Q&A by actual writers. Why didn't you hire a full staff of other writers, much less any women or non-white ones? Well, they had one female writer through seasons 1 to 3, but they went 5 years without a female writer, which is unprecedented for an Emmy-level show. And non-white writers, like one of their assistants who's Asian, wrote 4 out of 73 episodes, Dave Hill, but still we're asking, like, you don't have a single black writer on your staff. And for this ever, not just like, okay, one. And I have a clip of this, how they really floundered around trying to give an excuse. And all they really came down to is they bluntly said, because we were best for it. And it just encapsulated the whole hour of that panel, because they'd spent an hour joking and bragging about how we're unqualified and don't know what we're doing, which I think was them. They do that. It's the routine they run at Comic-Con or late night talk show interviews of, look how self-effacing we are, how unqualified we actually were, to try to own it almost, and to put their spin on it so it's not as critical. But this is an audience of screenwriters. You're so removed and tone deaf, you don't understand that mocking your production team for their loyalty to you and your writing qualifications or lack thereof might play at Comic-Con with just random fans, but it won't play at a writer's conference. And just at the end of that, building up to just, well, we knew we were best for it. No, you were not, you entitled brat. But that's all the back. Just they really dropped the ball on that. And this is again when all the positive spin about Game of Thrones is the best show ever, that you can't say a single negative thing about it, when HBO would actually try to hype up the value signaling of, look how diverse our network is for like one-shot shows, and your flagship show actually has record low behind-the-scenes diversity, and you are being criticized. It's like, if this was Downton Abbey, which one guy wrote most of that, and he writes women well, I wouldn't be complaining about this as much. There are vocal complaints about how this show is handling women, and by season 8, how it's handling non-white people. Yes, it is embarrassing and a mark against you that you don't have a single woman on staff, or non-white, there's no black writer. And you're going, oh, I guess when we killed Missandei, we killed off 100% of our black female characters for shock value to throw her in the fridge. This was a problem. They don't have a real response to it. And if you're going to go, oh, I'm pushing diversity, hire someone qualified. Yeah, this is all interconnected. And I'm hitting them on it because it's a point where they're weak, where the media will have to point out or at least shame them. Don't hold these guys up as paragon writers. They're not writers, and they had all these other things that you seem to value, like behind-the-scenes representation, were awful. So I hope that other groups are complaining about this will help spread this, of just, you really shorted us on this and we weren't allowed to complain. But now coming to the positive news, the new stuff coming from this announcement, Charmaine DeGraté is officially the first black writer on a Game of Thrones project, male or female, as well as the fourth female writer on this specific prequel. There's Ty Mickle, Claire Keishel. Recently we heard about Sarah Lee Hess, who is Korean and LGBT. She's married to another woman. And now we have Charmaine DeGraté. Well, actually, as she explained in the podcast interview I linked, which so how does she identify? She described herself as, quote, New Orleans Creole, and that both her parents were also New Orleans Creole. And, well, what she said in her own words was, "What is my identity?" She said, quote, Creole is a combination of Caribbean. Ours, I believe, were from the Dominican Republic, and then bits of Spanish, Native American, and French. I'm a mutt, end quote. And she uses the term woman of color to describe herself in the podcast interview. She says, I'm a woman of color. So, yeah, she's black. Black Creole. Like Beyonce, okay? She's like Beyonce. That Beyonce is Louisiana Creole, New Orleans Creole. And on her mother's side, she said her mother's great-grandfather was part of the Texas City shootout she talked about, and he was run out of town by the KKK. So I think if the Louisiana Ku Klux Klan runs you out of town, you probably qualify as black or person of color. Just black Creole from New Orleans. Well, specifically because her grandfather's grandfather got run out of Louisiana by the Klan, Charmaine was born and raised in Beaumont, Texas, which is right on the eastern border with Louisiana. It's part of the New Orleans greater region. You go to Beaumont. But her family is from New Orleans, and she has strong roots there. She said she still has a lot of extended family in New Orleans and frequently spent summers there as a child visiting relatives. On top of that, she said her name, Charmaine, is her parents named her after their favorite restaurant in New Orleans. Her name is French, Charmaine DeGraté. And that brings us back, actually, to her Austin Film Fest submission, the script she submitted for a movie that was never produced back in 2013 that got her a semifinalist place there. Her script was titled The Mistress of Marmont, and it was actually about a Creole courtesan in New Orleans in the 1800s. It was a period piece. And she's fascinated by the culture and the colonial stuff of the 1800s in New Orleans. And it was this Creole courtesan in high society there. And she said her script was, in my notes here, it was an extension of her senior year thesis and about ancestry and the culture there. So consider how Benioff and Weiss would write prostitutes on Game of Thrones just for cheap thrills, and were criticized for really mishandling that. And this is just for your own amusement, versus this is a woman who has written a period piece about Creole courtesans in 1800s New Orleans. I really like to hope she'll handle them a lot better, all the courtesans and stuff in Westeros and beyond. Also greatly enjoys international travel. I listened to this whole other travel podcast thing she did. I'll link that below too. Where, as I said, she'd been to Washington, D.C. as a congressional aide, and she actually worked in New York City for a time, and she's been to Canada because she spent time in Vancouver while they were filming The 100. And she said she's never been to Asia, but she's traveled extensively throughout Latin America and also traveled very extensively in Spain. And she says in the podcast she lived in Costa Rica for a full year at one point, as she phrased it, with her now ex-husband. That they had friends down there, so they went down for a writer's retreat. It originally intended just for a couple of months, then it turned into a year. And they didn't plan that, it just happened that way. So she spent a lot of time in Costa Rica. She's also visited Panama, Belize, and Mexico. And while she was visiting Spain, she also visited Morocco. So listen, it's a great podcast. I'll link that down below too. And the best part was she was talking about very specific places. She's been across Spain, but in high school, she actually spent a semester living in Madrid. You spend a semester abroad. That's the other thing, because she's New Orleans Creole, she's Catholic, so she went to a Catholic boarding school in Boston for some reason. I don't know why not one in Louisiana, but they were giving semesters abroad, so she went from there to Madrid for one and had a great time and has traveled across Spain. And because of all this time she spent in Latin America and Spain, she said through trial and error and needing to get by, I eventually learned fluent Spanish. So in terms of things we need for this show, House of the Dragon, consider that their main warm weather filming hub is going to continue to be Spain now. They do one or two things in Croatia now, but they've really shifted a lot to Spain due to its size and the variety of locations you can have in it. Everything from King's Landing to Old Town to Bravos. That this is a woman who is well-traveled in Spain and speaks Spanish. We see like Martin or a couple of the other producers trying to give interviews in local media outlets through translators. But if any of you are from, tell me in the comments if any of you are from Spanish-speaking countries in Latin America, or anyone from Spain. I know some of the people in my comments are from Madrid. I've heard people remarking on it. That this is a woman who is going to be a writer-producer who can actually give a fluent interview with local media. Heck, if you're one of the Game of Thrones Spanish fan sites, El Fuego or something, try to contact her, I guess. That might actually turn out. So this had me feeling really positive, for she is qualified in every respect in the ways that we didn't get for the first show for dealing with this.